All right, welcome to Dispensing Leadership with RPH Ally and Drug Topics. I'm Sean Bjorndal.
And I'm Jesse McCullough.
All right, thanks, Jess, for joining us again today. What are we going to talk about today?
Sean, I was thinking about it as we were preparing for recording. I was curious, do you have any travel plans coming up?
Yeah, we got a spring break in a couple weeks. Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Now, when you go on a trip, do you use a GPS to get there?
If I'm driving, yes.
Okay. So now, I think probably everybody knows how a GPS or is familiar with a GPS, but I don't know that everybody knows how a GPS works. Are you familiar with how a GPS works?
I am now because you told me in prepping for this episode. But tell me again.
That's right. So for the listeners who are not familiar with this, the GPS works by being able to measure your distance from at least three different stationary points. So just imagine you have points A, B, and C out there, and you're able to tell that you are, 5 miles from point A, 6 miles from point B, and 10 miles from point C. Whenever you know that distance from these three stationary positions, the technology can work, and this is like a real life application of trigonometry. But the technology can work to triangulate your position, and it can tell because it's bouncing and telling the distance. Whether you're moving away from point A or towards point A, and relative to all those different stationary reference points. But the GPS, I think, is what I wanted to talk about today, if that's all right with you, Sean, because we need to have a GPS for where we're going in our careers, and a lot of folks probably don't think about this. I know I hadn't thought about this, but there's at least three stationary points that I would like to throw out on the table for us to consider today, for to be able to help us figure out where we're going in our careers. And the first stationary point that I would throw out, especially for pharmacists, is the oath of the pharmacist. Right now, I'm not going to put you on the spot, Sean. I'll let you tell your own story after I tell mine. But the oath of the pharmacist is not something that I had a very close relationship with. Whenever I graduated from pharmacy school, we were at a special dinner. I went to a larger university where they basically just said, "Hey, everybody in the pharmacy class, stand up, sit down," and that's how graduation went. But we had a separate dinner later that evening to actually get our diplomas, and we were told, stand up, get in line alphabetical so we can present you with your diploma. And everybody was lined up. There was, I don't know, it was probably about 100 of us in my class, and they're getting ready to start the roll call to hand out the diplomas, and someone, and I don't even remember who it was, interrupted the roll call to say, wait, before we do this, we need to make sure that everybody recites the oath of the pharmacist. And to all of us standing in line there, we started to look at each other with a little bit of bewilderment, because this was a test we had not prepared for. We were not prepared for this, and so we sort of mumbled through the oath of the pharmacist. Now, I hope you don't have a story like that, Sean, but maybe you do. What has your relationship with the oath of the pharmacist been?
I think, right? Like, I think. I'm trying to
Mhm.
recall now. This was a while ago now.
Right.
We said the oath of a pharmacist when we got our white coats,
Okay.
P1 year. We may have said it when we graduated, right? But there, like you, we didn't have we had like two graduations. Like most of us didn't go to the graduation ceremony that the whole
Hmm.
college went to. We just went to
Hmm.
the pharmacy one that evening,
Right.
or that afternoon, and we might have said it there. I don't recall. It wasn't like, but yeah, that is as far as my relationship goes. My memory of the oath pharmacist, I couldn't even tell you a word that's on it, other than it probably says "I" in there somewhere.
Well, it does. It does. I'll read it here for us
Yeah,
in
please,
in
please
just in,
do.
in just a minute. But the fact of the matter is that the oath is very much a promise that we make. Right. I don't know. This is probably a little bit of a personal story, but there's times that I've apparently made promises that my kids intend for me to keep. You know, the kid's like, oh, you said we could stay up late, Dad, right? Or you said we're going to do this or we're going to do that. You said we could do this. But you know, when it comes down to it, we've taken the oath of the pharmacist at some point. And I would say that, you know, since my graduation day, you know, you'll see every once in a while if you go to a state or a national convention that there may be somebody that, you know, has oath of the pharmacist, and you get your name embroidered on it, or something like there. I've seen some people with some really nice presentations of the oath of the pharmacist. But you know, one of the things that I think is so important is that we need to know what's on it. We need to know the promises that we've made, because we need to keep the promises that we've made. So on my second screen here, it reads, this is the oath of the pharmacist from APHA, but it reads, I promise.
I'm talking about, is this the updated one?
This is
didn't they update it a couple of years ago?
Yeah, this is
Okay.
November 2021.
Okay.
Is what I have. And it says, I promise to devote myself to a lifetime of service to others through the profession of pharmacy. In fulfilling this vow, and now we have a whole list of things that we're going to do. In fulfilling this vow, I will consider the welfare of humanity and relief of suffering my primary concerns. I will promote inclusion, embrace diversity, and advocate for justice to advance health equity. I will apply my knowledge, experience, and skills to the best of my ability to assure optimal outcomes for all patients. I will respect and protect all personal and health information entrusted to me. I will accept the responsibility to improve my professional knowledge, expertise, and self awareness. I will hold myself and my colleagues to the highest principles of our profession's moral, ethical, and legal legal conduct. That was easy for me to say. I will embrace and advocate changes that improve patient care. I will utilize my knowledge, skills, experiences, and values to prepare the next generation of pharmacists. I take these vows voluntarily with the full realization of the responsibility with which I am entrusted by the public. That's the oath of the pharmacist, right? And what I have found, what I've found over the course of my career is that we've made the we all went through some formality of taking this oath, right? But we don't remember it. And I've seen a lot of conflicts happen because we don't remember the promises that we've made. Not dissimilar to the conflicts that may happen in my household when my kids say, Dad, you promised that we would, you know, fill in the blank, right? I could take you back a number of years when we were equipping pharmacists to provide immunization services. And you know, there were some pharmacists that are like, I don't think pharmacists should do this, right? I don't think we should be doing this. Whereas, you know, I can now look at that through the lens of the oath of the pharmacist, and you know, and I would even suggest this for your PGX Ally work, right? I will embrace and advocate changes that improve patient care. Right. One of those changes would be pharmacy-based immunization services. That's what it was 20 years ago when I started down that road. Right. But it, you know, next thing could be specialized medicine or personalized medicine. You know, and there's more to come. Right. But the idea is that we're always going to advocate for changes that improve patient care. And you know, I've encountered a number of pharmacists that maybe don't have that perspective. They don't have that philosophy. So the first thing that we need to understand for our GPS is, what are the promises that we've made, right? So that's the oath of the pharmacist. The second point that I would share with you is, and this is going to vary for whatever organization that you're working with, but it's the mission of the organization where you find yourself, right? And most companies that you work for probably have a mission statement. Perhaps you work for a company that doesn't have a mission statement, and as such, you just sort of float along, and you're somewhat directionless. But you know, I would encourage you to look up what your what the mission of your organization is. And if you don't have one, it's probably not a bad idea to try to articulate one. And if if your organization has one, you may have to take and really personalize that for your particular team as to how your team contributes to that in the larger scheme of things, especially if you work for a larger company that has all sorts of different divisions and initiatives and so on and so forth as you go through that. The third piece, the third stationary piece, is core values. And this was such an impactful moment for me. It was, if I pulled a calendar out, I could tell you when this was, but I was at a conference. It was right before Mother's Day in May of 2014. I was at a conference in the Washington D.C. area, and a speaker came out on stage and said to a group, there were about 500 of us in the audience that day, and he said to us, "How many of you work for a company that has core values?" Well, if you looked around that room, there's 500 hands in the room, and 500 hands went up. In his next breath, he said, "How many of you know what those core values are?" And 500 hands in the room came down. And I looked around and I was like, wow. Now I knew I worked for a company that had core values. I knew that. Now the thing was I didn't know what they were. And that started me down a pathway, and it took several months for me to finally, sort of figure out how and what to do with this information. But I'm sure we'll tell this story somewhere along the line as we continue our conversations here, Sean. But it was right before Thanksgiving that year, so about 6 months later, and I found myself leading a department meeting, and I asked, and there were about 30 people in my department at the time, and I said, do we have core values here? And amongst the 30 people in the room, they came to a quick consensus that absolutely we have core values. I said, okay, how many core values do we have? Well, now they got a little bit puzzled. They got a little bit puzzled, and they were looking at each other, and some people said 5, some people said 6. I think we have 9. I think we have 13 core values. So me being the trickster that I am, I try to make fun out of all this stuff. I said, well, we're going to play a game here. We're going to play Family Feud. And I divided 30 people in half into 2 teams of 15. And I said, we're going to play Family Feud. And this is the question, the top 5 to 13 answers, because that was the range. We didn't know if there were 5. We didn't know if there were 13. The correct answer was there were 9. We had 9 core values. But I said the top 9 or the top 5 to 13 answers are on the board. And here's the question. Name one of our core values. And Sean, we went through 30 people. We had 1 correct answer. Now I'll ask you. I'll let you know. My guess is you have worked for organizations that have core values.
Yeah.
Do you know? No. Do you know how many they had?
No
do you know what they were? Right. No. And like this, if you want to change your organization, it can start right where you're at. It can start today. Because that, on that particular day, I did that exercise to prove a point to my department. And then what I did is I went back to my core team after that. And I said, we need to know our core values. And what we did is we started every meeting. We had a weekly meeting, and every meeting we started by reciting our core values. And it was amazing. And the way we did it, there were 8 people on my team, on my core team, 32 people, whatever it was in the department. But within that, when you came into the meeting, everybody had to give a core value, but the last person had to fill in the last 2. Right. That was how we did. We even added our own core value for our particular team, which was to be yourself unless you're a jerk. Right, which was to improve the we wanted to have fun. We wanted to improve just the acceptance and the diversity within the group. So be yourself, but you're going to be a jerk, don't be yourself, be
Yeah.
somebody else, right? That was kind of how we approached it. But that's what we did. And every week, that's what we started out. We started out, what are the core values? What are the core values? What are the core values? And we went through and we rattled them off. And it was amazing. It was amazing on how so many of the problems that we dealt with, like every, I mean, there's a wonderful thing about being on a team that hasn't done anything before, right? And what I mean by that is you are blazing a trail. I was on the clinical team within this organization. Basically there was no training manual for what we did. That book was blank. Everything we did, we were building from the ground up, and that was an exciting time. But on the other side of that was we had to deal with a lot of problems. We had to figure out, how do you make this work? How do you get this stuff done? And like there were some of these things that it seemed like we just labored and labored and
Yeah.
labored and labored through them. And when it came down to it, by establishing an understanding of our core values within the team was so impactful, because it gave a formula, it gave context, it gave us a GPS. Really, it
Yeah.
completed the GPS for what direction are we going to go. And it allowed us to solve problems so much more easily. It allowed us to build consensus and to find allies within the organization so much more easily. And it's actually been something that I have, this is a drum that I've been beating now for over a decade, right? Know your core values. Know your core values. I do some volunteer work over the weekend, and I've been doing that for a number of years. And one of the things that I do every week is we start off our meetings by reciting our core values. And I have teenagers in that group, well into senior citizens in that group, and they all know the core values.
That's awesome.
And it's such a wonderful thing to see, because it provides direction to what we're doing. So I've done an awful lot of talking here, Sean. I want to see if you have any reactions, but these are three things that have helped give some, it just helps give direction. It helps you figure out which end is up and which way you're going. So I don't know if any of that resonates with you, or if just curious as to if anything sticks out to you here today.
Well, I think even if we don't know the oath, we can always get back to the oath and remember why we took that oath, right? But when we get into missions and core values, a lot of that feels like philosophy, like, and they overlap. I'm trying to think of, well, at least like the mission piece of that is like, in kind of two questions there. Obviously one is like, okay, do you know your mission within the company? If you're a pharmacy owner, do you have a mission within that your teammates and your team knows? And if you're an employee, do you know the mission, and does it align with your mission in life?
Right.
I believe we're all going to have our own missions, right?
Well, we all have our own missions, and truth be told, we all have our own values.
Yeah.
Too. Like, as I went down this pathway, I one of the things that I found is that we often, individually, you have values, I have values. Now, they're probably rather similar. Now, we haven't taken the time to the listeners, we haven't taken the time to write our values down and compare notes. But I would suggest that, generally speaking, that there's probably a little bit of overlap. And the reason that I can say that is because I have found that values are magnetic. And what I mean by that is, they behave like a magnet. In a magnet, when you find the right things, people are attracted to it or they're repelled away from it. Right. And that's such an important thing to understand, because you will find organizations that are magnetized, and you'll go there and they don't mesh with your values, and they'll push you away. Right now, whether it's a pharmacy organization, whether it's a restaurant, some other business, right? There's different things out there. There's some things that will attract, and there's other things that will repel. And when you don't know what those values are, then what I found the default was that we all assumed, and we know the danger of that, right? We all assumed that everybody else just shared our values.
Yeah.
And and that's all right until there's an issue, right? When there's an issue, now all of a sudden, I'm evaluating something based. I'm evaluating something based on my value set that you did, and it doesn't sit well for whatever reason. But it made perfect sense to you because it was in alignment with your value set, right? So I will tell you that you can do this down to the individual level, right? You can go down to the individual person on your team and you can find out what their values are. I did this exercise with one group, and we start off, I think there's about 40 different values, or maybe 42 values that we start off with. And the goal is to figure out what your top values are. And it was interesting. Whenever we were all done, we went around the room and we shared what our top value was. And just as an aside, my top value was growth. But there was somebody in the room whose top value was fun. And, I probably rolled my eyes a little bit because I at least like to consider myself to be more serious than that. I don't know if that's true or not, but I was like, hey, the number one thing that this guy makes his decisions on is it fun?
Yeah. Wow.
Right. And now let's think about that for our coworkers. Let's think about that for the people that we serve. Right? They have different values.
Yeah.
And
Meet them where they are.
yeah, and you got to meet them where they are. To go back to a previous thing that we shared, you got to meet people where they are, and their values are so important.
That's awesome, Jess. Well, hey, thank you so much. This has been a great episode as far as diving into like where we are, where in terms of our location, OS missions, core values, right? Finding our, using that GPS, knowing where we need to like put more effort in, right? And I think there could be a lot of lessons that just spin out from this episode alone. So we will get to that. Any final thoughts, Jess?
You know what? I would give this final thought. I would ask every listener: does your company have core values, and do you know them? And if not, I would encourage you to start there today.
Awesome. Hey, appreciate your wisdom, Jess. We'll talk soon. Until next time.